Nick in Borehamwood.
Yeah, hi Nick.
Hello.
My question is more about press regulation, and it's my belief that the disadvantages of press regulation far outweigh the advantages, and a democratic society should really be based on informed and apprised decisions. I'm just wondering how you think that we can make decisions, and choices on critical issues that affect society as a whole when certain issues don't even reach the public domain.
Well, that's a slightly different issue about the things that don't reach the public domain. But the point you made about press sort of regulation, I couldn't agree with you more. I think anything which puts regulation of our wonderfully raucous, in fact, uniquely, I think, raucous press in the hands of politicians and governments would be an absolute disaster. You know, I'm an old-fashioned liberal, and in a sense, regardless of what the press ever say about me, I'll always defend their right to my last breath to say disobliging things about people in power and keep people in power in particular on their toes. That's what a free society is all about. But let's remember, this is not actually what we're talking about here, which is, I'm assuming you didn't refer to it, but you're referring to this whole thing about Leveson and the reaction to those terrible events about Millie Dowler. And let's remember
what I'm worried about is it starts with that and then leads to something sort of a lot scarier. Because I mean, I know the government, etc., and the media probably say that wouldn't happen, but the government, including yourself, you're not famed for keeping your promises. If we look at the sort of fees for universities, etc., they were never going to rise, and they kind of did. I'm just worried that they'll say one thing now and sort of change their mind, and who knows when it will end.
Well, as I say, let's look at what we're actually dealing with here, Nick. We're dealing here with a recommendation from this judge, Lord Justice Leveson, that said, no, you shouldn't have heavy-handed legislation by the state imposed on the press. That's a fundamental breach of the way we kind of live as a free democratic society. You need self-regulation. In other words, the press should be free to set up something where they can establish arrangements so that, I don't know, if someone wants to complain or wants to demand an apology or there's been basically just an abuse of their privacy, that there's a right to recourse. And what he said is those arrangements, those self-regulatory arrangements, need to be properly checked for their independence. Because, of course, what happened in the past was that the press, in a sense, in those self-regulatory arrangements, it was all a bit of a sort of cosy club where they were judge and jury, and so that's the heart of the Leveson recommendations. And where there's dispute, it gets very, very techie. Is actually the how you establish the body, which will every 3 years, I think it is, check whether these independent self-regulatory arrangements really are indeed independent or not. And that's where all
I think on several different accounts, self-regulation doesn't work. If we look at the Independent Police Commission, I don't think that's working too well. The same with the press. I don't know of many other industries where we regulate ourselves. It's like me doing something wrong and then me telling myself off. I can't see how that works.
That's not quite right. There are actually examples in advertising, in legal services and so on, where the industry will set up, if you like, its own kind of watchdog, if I can put it that way. And what Lord Justice Leveson said was to give the public assurance after the abuses of the past that really will have some teeth and really will be properly independent. You need an independent body that kind of applies an MOT, if you like, every 3 years to make sure it really is properly independent and functioning effectively. That's what Lord Justice Leveson recommended should be set up. That's what all political parties in the House of Commons overwhelmingly backed back in March, and that's what we are now inching towards implementing. But Nick, the only thing I would say to you is you can't kind of have it both ways. You can't say I don't like regulation of the press, but I don't like self-regulation either. In a sense, what you've expressed is the dilemma where we're trying to strike the right balance.
Well, of course, I just think regulation in general for the press, for a democratic society, just isn't going to work. I think this country prides itself on free speech.
Yeah. So, Nick, what's your answer then if someone someone has their privacy abused or is absolutely traduced in the papers and it's not true, and they could, legitimately can call for an apology?
Our privacy is already being abused. I could go into that in depth, but I think our privacy.
Not sure if we've got the time for that. No.
Exactly.
Nick, thank you. Mr. Clegg, just a question from me. With the benefit of hindsight, how wise was it when you were sitting eating pizza at 2:00 in the morning in Ed Miliband's office as members of the Hacked Off campaign, not to have any representatives of the newspaper or magazine industry there?
Oh, listen, the press had been coming in and out of Downing Street.
But the 2 a.m. meeting where you're enjoying your pizza margaritas.
It's rather important to explain that the meeting on that weekend, or that Sunday evening, actually only, I think, dealt with two minuscule aspects of the whole. The wider arrangements, there's been constant discussions with all interested parties in the press. Maria Miller, over recent weeks and months, has been assiduously talking.
So it didn't matter they weren't there at this.
Meeting. I think a mythology has attached itself to what happened on that Sunday evening. This wasn't some great sort of tablet of stone which was drafted.
Why not ring one of them up? They'd have come round.
Because, as I say, there'd been far more meetings actually with members of the press in Downing Street and in Whitehall in the weeks preceding that, which in a sense had settled the vast majority of issues. There were some couple of outstanding issues which were focused on that evening. But look, this is obviously something which provokes strong reaction.
It's understandable, isn't it? If you're in the newspaper game and you weren't invited to what... And I hear what you say, it probably has gained extraordinary...
Sorry. It's a complete nonsense, this idea that something was cooked up there and that the press were not involved in having...
Well, they weren't involved at that meeting.
Not in that meeting, but there were several...
But hacked off were.
Well, there were several
That's kind of strange. It's like doing a divorce and only having one side come along, isn't it?
There were many, many meetings, of course, where victims were not present at all, and there were members of the press were there and members of the government and so on. So I just think...
what's going to happen if none of the newspaper groups agree to go along with this Royal Charter?
We'll see. As I was just saying to Nick earlier, I think what everyone needs to do is just kind of keep a sense of perspective about what we're trying to put in place here, which is to allow the press the freedom and the right to set up its own self-regulatory arrangements. That was the central proposition of Leveson, but to make sure that those self-regulatory arrangements, unlike the ones that preceded it, the Press Complaints Commission and so on, are properly independent. There's no point having, if you like, a system of recourse and ability to demand apologies and so on, unless that is done in a genuinely independent way. And all you're doing, all that actually Leveson has recommended, is a relatively light touch system where every 3 years someone who is credible, authoritative, objective, not with an axe to grind, I totally accept that, basically says, well, we'll have a look at these arrangements and to see whether they really do give the public the confidence, because at the end of the day, this isn't actually about editors or politicians, it's about the public. Are they being properly served by a raucous free press? But where things go wrong, people are held to account. That's all it is.
Lastly, of course, people in the industry would say, well, you can't be a little bit married or you can't be a little bit pregnant. Either they are getting their fingers in it or they're not.
Well, the politicians are not getting their fingers in it through legislation. This is not a government-imposed thing. It is a body, which is not a government body. It's a body established by a royal charter. That's why everyone's got into the sort of undergrowth of this arcane non-law that is royal charter, but has, in a sense, the force of has some force in order to establish an institution independently. Royal charters are, for instance, used to establish the BBC, so that there is a body which people can have confidence in, which every 3 years looks at the self-regulatory arrangements and says, yep, they're working well, and the public should have confidence that they function independently of the press.